The first time my daughter-in-law, Melissa, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're too old and embarrassing to be around my children." It was 10:42 a.m. on a bright Sunday morning, June 12th. I remember the time because I had just poured tea for the twins, Evan and Sophie, both 6, and she slapped the cup from my hand so hard that the porcelain cracked against the tiled kitchen floor. The tea spread like a stain under the table. That sound, the tiny splinter of ceramic, the soft splash of wasted warmth, has echoed in my head ever since. I was 68 then, recently widowed, still wearing my husband's watch because I hadn't yet learned how to stop checking the time the way he used to. For 15 years I had raised our only son, Daniel, almost single-handedly. We owned a modest home on Ridgeview Drive in Hartford, Connecticut. Daniel had been the pride of our lives, an engineer who worked his way up from a $1,200 a month trainee to earning over $130,000 a year by the time he turned 35. And then came Melissa. Melissa arrived in our lives like a gust of perfume and arrogance. She worked in public relations, spoke with that crisp, rehearsed confidence of someone used to being photographed, and never missed an opportunity to correct my grammar at dinner. The first time she visited our home, she refused to eat the stew I had cooked because, as she put it, old-fashioned recipes smell like regret. My husband squeezed my hand under the table that night, silently warning me not to react. He's gone now. Heart attack 3 winters ago. Daniel and Melissa were engaged at the time. I remember standing at the funeral, holding my son's arm as he promised to look after me always. But always turned into less than 3 years. The first year after the wedding, things were fine. I visited twice a week to help with the babies. I cooked, cleaned, and even took the night shifts so Melissa could sleep. I was proud I was the kind of mother-in-law who meddled. I told myself, love earns love back. But love doesn't always earn love. It sometimes earns resentment. The shift began quietly. One afternoon, Melissa came home earlier than usual and saw me teaching the twins how to fold paper boats. They were covered in laughter, the floor littered with newspaper triangles. She didn't smile. She just stood at the doorway and said, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't teach them old habits. They need modern stimulation, not this." "This?" I asked, holding up a paper boat. "Yes, that. Useless things." I didn't say anything then, but something in me began to ache that day. A kind of ache that doesn't sit in the body but somewhere behind your ribs, quietly whispering that something sacred is being taken from you. Months passed. She started controlling my visits, first to weekends only, then to twice a month. Then she began texting instead of calling, saying, "The kids are tired," or "They've got piano lessons," or "Maybe next week, Evelyn." Always polite, always cold. Daniel, caught between loyalty and fear, said little. "Mom," he'd say, rubbing his temples, "Melissa just wants what's best for the kids. Don't take it personally." But when Melissa told me to stop calling the house altogether, that she'd inform me when it's appropriate, I knew something had changed beyond repair. The final insult came that Sunday morning when she banned me completely. "You are not to come here again," she said, her voice clipped, precise, like a memo being read aloud. "The children get anxious when you're around. You confuse them. You talk about death, about old things. You tell them stories that make them sad." "They're stories about their grandfather," I said softly. "Exactly," she replied. "And he's dead. Let's keep it that way." My hands trembled. "You can't erase family," a sharp, almost pitying smile. "Watch me." That was the moment the world tilted. I stood there for a few seconds, the ticking clock in the hallway suddenly louder than anything else. I turned to Daniel. He avoided my eyes, staring at the table as if there were something fascinating in the wood grain. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Mom, maybe it's best if you give it some space. Just for a while." "Space?" I repeated. "From my grandchildren?" He nodded without meeting my gaze. I left without another word. That night, I sat in my living room, surrounded by framed photos of my family, each one suddenly feeling like a lie. The silence was heavy enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator, the slow creak of the ceiling fan. At exactly 11:30 p.m., I called Daniel. No answer. I called again at midnight. Still nothing. By 2 a.m., I realized he wasn't going to pick up. And something inside me hardened. I learned that night that grief and rage often wear the same face. They both whisper, "Do something." The next morning, I opened my late husband's old briefcase. Inside were files, legal papers, investment portfolios, insurance documents. My husband had left a detailed record of everything he ever owned, down to the last dollar. He used to say, "Never leave a family unprepared." By 8 a.m., I had made my first phone call. To Mr. Gerald Price, our family attorney. "Gerald, it's Evelyn. I need to update the beneficiaries on my estate." "Of course, Mrs. Harris," he said, cheerful as ever. "Same as before? Your son and grandchildren?" "No," I replied, my voice calm but cold. "Remove Daniel. For now." There was silence on the line. "Are you certain?" "Very." It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was something quieter, clarity. Over the next week, I began organizing everything my husband and I had built together. The house on Ridgeview Drive, the small rental property on Elm Street that generated $2,400 a month, the savings account with $148,000. Piece by piece, I created a wall of paperwork between my heart and my son's indifference. At 10:15 a.m. the following Wednesday, I mailed a letter to Daniel and Melissa. Inside were 3 lines. "I understand you wish to protect your children from embarrassment. You won't have to worry about that anymore. I won't be contacting you again. No threats. No anger. Just the quiet dignity of withdrawal." 3 weeks passed. Not a word from them. Not even a text on my birthday. During that time, I began volunteering at a children's literacy program downtown. It was supposed to be a distraction, but it became something else entirely, a purpose. The first day I arrived, I was handed a group of 6 children who could barely read at grade level. I started with simple stories, fairy tales, and poems. Within a month, they were reading aloud with pride. Their faces lit up with the same joy I used to see in my grandchildren's eyes. One afternoon, as I was leaving the center, I overheard 2 children whispering, "Miss Evelyn's stories are better than cartoons," one said. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not from sadness, but from the realization that love, when rejected, doesn't die. It simply finds new places to grow. Still, part of me couldn't let go. I checked Daniel's social media once a week. I saw photos of birthdays, vacations, smiling faces I was no longer allowed to be part of. In one picture, Melissa had captioned, "Family means protecting your kids from negativity." Negativity. That was me now, a cautionary tale in her filtered world. Then, in early December, something happened that began to turn the tide. At 3:17 p.m. on a Thursday, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Harris?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Angela Cooper from Hartford General. I'm calling regarding your daughter-in-law, Melissa." My pulse quickened, but she had a fainting episode during a client presentation. Her husband couldn't be reached immediately, so your number was listed as secondary emergency contact. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the wall. They had erased me from their lives, but not from the hospital forms. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. When I arrived, Melissa was in a private room, pale but conscious. Daniel wasn't there yet. I stood quietly by the door. When she opened her eyes and saw me, her face tightened. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "You listed me as emergency contact," I said. "I came because I still care, Melissa." She looked away, embarrassed. "I didn't update the forms. That's all." I nodded. "Then I'll stay until he arrives. Just to make sure you're all right." She said nothing. For 30 minutes, silence filled the room except for the beeping of machines. But I noticed something. She kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. There was no arrogance in her face now, only exhaustion. When Daniel finally arrived, his eyes widened at the sight of me. "Mom, you came?" "Of course," I said. "You're my family, whether I'm welcome or not." Melissa looked down, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flicker. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. That night, after they left the hospital together, I sat in my car and made a decision. I wasn't going to chase love anymore, but I would live in a way that made ignoring me impossible. What Melissa didn't know, and what would soon change everything, was that the children's literacy program I volunteered for was funded by a private educational trust. A trust one had just been asked to manage. And in less than 3 months, that program would expand into their children's very own private school. The same school that would soon send Melissa a letter she could never ignore. Because karma, I've learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the quiet paperwork of fate. Hartford lay under a thin crust of snow. The city looked softer, quieter, like even the cruelest words could be buried if you waited long enough. But underneath that calm, something far more deliberate was taking shape. On January 2nd, at exactly 9 a.m., I signed the final set of documents making me the managing trustee of the Milton Foundation for Childhood Literacy. It was a $2.6 million endowment designed to fund early education programs across Connecticut. I had earned the board's trust through volunteer work and a written proposal I'd spent sleepless nights perfecting. That same morning, the foundation's director, Mrs. Jenkins, handed me a list of schools being considered for grants. There, among them, was Hartford Hill Academy, the prestigious private institution where my grandchildren, Evan and Sophie, were enrolled. "Would you like to handle this file personally?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Personally and thoroughly." For weeks I reviewed budgets, teacher evaluations, and community involvement reports. Hartford Hill had excellent academics but a glaring weakness. Its community outreach program was non-existent. The foundation's charter required schools to participate in at least one social literacy initiative to remain eligible for funding. That gave me leverage, not to harm anyone, but to create an opportunity for justice disguised as generosity. By the first week of February, I scheduled a meeting with the school's headmistress, Mrs. Lynn Carter. She greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Harris, we're honored that the foundation is considering us for support." I smiled politely. "It's not just about funding. We're also selecting partner families to help expand our new literacy outreach. We want to feature them in promotional materials. Role models who represent compassion, respect, and family values." Her eyes brightened. "That's wonderful. I think the Walker family might be perfect. Melissa Walker's children are star pupils. The Walkers." I repeated softly. "Yes, I know them. She's very active in our PTA," Mrs. Carter continued. "Stylish, confident, always willing to lead." "Confidence is admirable," I said, "as long as it's built on kindness." Mrs. Carter looked momentarily uncertain. "Should I contact her for your team?" "Not yet," I replied. "Let's review all candidates first." That evening, I called Gerald Price again. "Gerald," I said, "remember that educational trust we discussed? I'd like to set up a new subgrant in my husband's name, the Richard Harris Literacy Fellowship. It will provide scholarships for underprivileged children to attend private schools, starting with Hartford Hill." "That's an excellent idea," he said. "How much are you allocating?" $350,000 to start. "But I'll require full control over the selection committee." He chuckled. "You always did like precision, Evelyn." "I believe in earned worth," I said. 3 weeks later, Hartford Hill Academy held its annual fundraising gala. Melissa and Daniel attended, dressed impeccably, she in a silver gown, he in a dark tailored suit. I hadn't been invited, of course. But I was there, standing quietly near the back as a guest of the foundation. When the headmistress took the stage, she announced the partnership. "We're thrilled to welcome the Milton Foundation as our new community literacy sponsor. And tonight, we have among us the woman responsible for making this possible, Mrs. Evelyn Harris." The spotlight swung toward me. Melissa's face froze. I walked to the podium, steady, calm, the way my husband used to walk into board meetings. The applause faded as I began to speak. "When I was a young mother," I said, "I believed that love and education were the two greatest gifts we could give a child. But as I grew older, I learned something more profound. Those gifts mean nothing without respect. True family isn't defined by blood or appearances. It's defined by tighten around her champagne glass. This foundation's goal, I continued, is not just to build readers, but to build hearts capable of humility. Every family selected for our fellowship will serve as mentors for less fortunate children. Because dignity is not inherited, it's earned through service. There was a moment of silence. Then applause. But Melissa didn't clap. After the event, as guests mingled, she approached me near the coat check. "What are you doing here?" she hissed under her breath. "Working," I said simply. "The foundation and I have partnered with your children's school. You'll be seeing more of me apparently." Her voice dropped. "You think you can force your way back into our lives with charity money?" "I don't need to force anything," I said calmly. "Life has a way of circling back on its own." Her lips trembled with restrained fury. "Stay away from my family." "Your family?" I said softly. Funny how quickly that word forgets where it came from. Before she could answer, a staff member called her name. She turned and left without another word. By mid-March, the Foundation's program officially launched. The headmistress invited select families to participate in mentoring sessions. Despite her resistance, Melissa was pressured to join. Her children were top students, and the program's publicity was vital for the school's funding renewal. The first session took place on March 18th at 10 a.m. in the school auditorium. I arrived early. The hall smelled faintly of chalk dust and floor polish, familiar scents that carried memories of my own teaching days decades ago. When Melissa walked in, she froze again. I smiled. "Good morning." She forced one in return, stiff and polite. Throughout the event, I watched her struggle to perform kindness in front of cameras and staff. When asked to read to the children, her voice wavered. She mispronounced simple words. She kept glancing at me. One of the reporters asked, "Mrs. Walker, what inspired you to join this program?" She stammered. Giving back is important. My mother-in-law, my husband's late mother, used to volunteer." "Not late," I said softly from behind her. "Still very much alive." The room chuckled lightly. Melissa's face turned crimson. That clip aired on local news the next morning. By noon, it was trending on social media under the headline, "Local family embarrassed by on-air slip." Poetic irony, I thought. The fallout began almost immediately. Sponsors who once adored her careful image started pulling away. Her PR firm, which had built its reputation on polished optics, called her into a meeting on March 25th. I know because one of their board members, an old friend from the foundation, called me that evening. "She wasn't fired," he said, "but she's on probation. They don't like negative attention." I didn't celebrate. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Daniel called for the first time in months. His voice was tight. "Mom," he began, "did you have anything to do with that school partnership?" "Yes," I said truthfully. "It's my work." He sighed heavily. "Melissa's been under a lot of pressure lately. The media thing made her look foolish." "She embarrassed herself," I said gently. "Actions have consequences." "Please don't make this harder," he said. "You've made your point." "I haven't made any point," I replied. "Life did." He was silent for a moment. "You've changed, Mom." "No," I said. "I've remembered who I was before you let someone convince you I was a burden." After that call, I didn't hear from him again for another 2 months. But through silence, consequences continued to unfold. By May, Melissa's firm lost a major client due to public perception issues. Their official memo mentioned a lapse in professional image management. The partners blamed her overexposure in the community project that had unintentionally made her look hypocritical, preaching empathy while ostracizing her own family. She resigned on May 16th. That same week, I received an email from the headmistress. "Mrs. Harris, your commitment to our literacy program has been remarkable. The children adore you. We'd love for you to deliver the keynote address at the year-end assembly." I accepted. The assembly was scheduled for June 12th. Exactly 1 year to the day since Melissa had banned me from seeing my grandchildren. Fate has perfect symmetry. That morning, I arrived early again. Evan and Sophie were seated in the front row, fidgeting with ribbons on their uniforms. They looked taller, more grown, but their eyes, his curious blue, her soft green, still held that same light. When they saw me step onto the stage, their mouths dropped open in surprise. "Grandma," Sophie whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," I said through the microphone, my voice steady but trembling with emotion. "It's me." The audience quieted. I spoke about reading, about love, about legacy. But in the final minutes, I said something else, something I hadn't planned. "There are people," I said, "who believe age is embarrassment. That wisdom fades when hair turns gray. But I've learned the opposite. Age doesn't erase worth, it reveals it. Respect your elders not because they're perfect, but because they've survived enough to understand what truly matters." As I finished, I looked directly at Melissa. She was sitting 3 rows back, stiff pale, clutching her purse like an anchor. The applause rose around her like a tide. After the ceremony, Evan and Sophie ran to me. "Grandma, Grandma," they shouted. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" I knelt and hugged them, the warmth of their small bodies against me almost undoing every wall I had built. "Because," I said softly, "some surprises are better when they're shaken, almost fragile." "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Of course," I replied. We sat on a bench near the garden, the sound of children laughing in the distance. "I didn't know," she began, voice trembling. "I didn't know you were involved in all this. You've built something incredible." "I didn't do it for you," I said gently. "I did it because I still believe children deserve love without conditions." She swallowed hard. "I was wrong about you." "I know," I said. Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting them, from sadness, from age, from death. But all I did was teach them pride." I nodded. Pride isolates. Humility connects. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Can you forgive me?" I looked at her, remembering the shattered teacup, the humiliation, the months of silence. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can hand over like charity," I said slowly. "It's something you earn through change. Show them, Melissa. Show them you've learned." She nodded, wiping her face. "I will." As I stood to leave, she reached for my hand. Not to control, not to manipulate, but simply to hold. That was the first honest touch between us. But redemption isn't achieved in a single moment. It's proven in the days that follow. The next weeks would test whether her remorse was real. And that test began the day she found out her husband, my son, had made a choice she wasn't prepared for. A choice that would strip away every illusion she still clung to. The courthouse smelled like rain and old paper, that damp mix of dust, ink, and judgment. As I stepped inside, the echo of footsteps down the marble corridor felt like ghosts following me, whispering every word my siblings had thrown at me. Ungrateful. Greedy. Dad never trusted you. But today wasn't about them. It was about him. The man who'd taught me that treasure wasn't gold. It was truth hidden in plain sight. Reporters with notepads, the faint shuffle of documents, the hum of curiosity. My siblings sat together at the front, perfectly coordinated, as if deceit had a dress code. Victor adjusted his tie, Claudia crossed her legs with that rehearsed air of dignity, and Peter whispered something that made them all smirk. I didn't sit with them. I took the far left seat beside my lawyer, an older man who'd represented my father's company years ago. He'd known Dad personally, and when I first showed him what I'd found in the storage unit, he'd gone silent for a long, long minute. Then he simply said, "Your father wasn't crazy. He was meticulous." The judge entered. The room rose. Silence dropped like a stone. When the hearing began, my sibling's attorney wasted no time. "Your Honor, my client simply wished to contest the legitimacy of the assets presented by Mr. Hale, as they were not listed in the official will nor accounted for in probate. We have reasons to believe he may have manipulated or fabricated these so-called records." The lawyer's tone oozed contempt. Every word was a needle. But when it was our turn, My lawyer stood calmly, adjusting his glasses. With all due respect, Your Honor, my client has in his possession original documents signed, sealed, and notarized by the late Mr. Samuel Hale himself. Documents that were misplaced during the estate division. These documents concern a private trust, established 12 years ago, bearing the signatures of witnesses who are ready to testify today. The room shifted. My siblings stiffened. Victor's smile faltered for the first time. The evidence was brought in, a black binder thick and worn at the edges. It was the same binder I'd found beneath the false floorboard in the storage unit. I'd spent nights poring over it, learning every signature, every number, every hint of what Dad had really been building. The trust was titled, not only were detailed ownership certificates for a series of real estate investments, but also shares in a renewable energy startup that had, since my father's death, exploded in value. The holdings were worth more than the entire estate my siblings had split. And at the bottom of the last page, in Dad's precise handwriting, for my child who seeks meaning before money, whoever finds this will understand what real wealth is, not what's handed down, but what's discovered. The courtroom buzzed. Claudia stood up abruptly. That's not possible. He would have told us. The judge tapped his gavel once. Miss Hale, please. But she couldn't stop. He was old, confused. He didn't know what he was doing. This is manipulation. My lawyer calmly passed the notarized timestamp documents forward. Each one dated, signed, witnessed by two of Dad's oldest associates. Even the lawyer they'd hired to draft the original will confirmed his signature. It was airtight. And yet, when the judge read the final clause aloud, even I wasn't prepared for the sting. This trust is to be granted not for possession, but for preservation. The recipient may not sell the assets for profit. Instead, the annual income shall fund a scholarship foundation for underprivileged youth in the name of my late wife. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I had imagined walking away with something tangible. Something to finally prove I wasn't the family failure. But Dad had left me something heavier, something sacred. Not riches. Responsibility. My lawyer leaned toward me. He trusted you with his heart, not his wallet. And suddenly I understood. The coins, the notes, the photos, they weren't random nostalgia. They were breadcrumbs, leading to the final lesson he wanted me to live by. Wealth is only worthwhile when it gives back. The judgment was swift. The trust was declared valid. I was named the sole custodian of Project Legacy. The sound echoed like closure. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. Reporters swarmed, flashes went off, but all I saw were my siblings standing under the awning, silent, pale, angry, maybe even ashamed. Victor approached first. You planned this, didn't you? His voice cracked. You made us look like fools. I shook my head. No, Victor. You did that yourselves when you stopped listening to Dad. Claudia's eyes glistened. So you get everything? I smiled faintly. Not everything. Just what matters. They didn't answer. They just turned away, their designer umbrellas catching the last drops of rain as they disappeared into the crowd. I walked toward the street, the storage key still on my keychain. A small, worn reminder of where this all began. That night, I went back to the storage unit one last time. I turned the lights on, and for the first time, it didn't look like a graveyard of forgotten junk. It looked like a map of memories, a story only I'd cared enough to read. I took out the last item from the box I hadn't opened yet, a sealed envelope marked Final Note. Inside, Dad's handwriting, trembling but clear. If you're reading this, you found it. You did what they never would. You looked past the dust. I'm proud of you, not for inheriting my work, but for understanding it. Use what I've left not to build your fortune, but to build your name, one that means something. I stood there for a long time, tears blurring the ink. When I left, I locked the unit, but this time I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally carrying it forward. The next month, I registered the Hale Foundation, with its first scholarships awarded to students who'd lost their parents and couldn't afford education. The media called it poetic justice. I called it homecoming. And as the first students walked onto the stage to
Quiet
receive
boy
their
with the same
award, shy smile
one of
I'd
them.
once had handed me a note. It said, "Thank you for believing that something forgotten can still have value." I smiled, because maybe that's what Dad wanted me to learn all along. That love, legacy, and redemption aren't inherited. They're discovered. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We post new emotional and dramatic stories every week, filled with twists, lessons, and endings you'll never see coming. Your support helps us create more stories like this one. Subscribe now and be part of our storytelling family.